In this seemingly innocent photo taken on July 16, 1945, 5 girls were captured happily swimming in a river. But look closely at the image. This was no average hot summer day. It was snowing, or at least, that's what they thought. The truth was much darker, because none of these girls would live past the age of 30, except for Barbara Kent, the girl kneeling in the middle. She had to watch as all of her friends slowly died, one by one, until she was the only one left. So when she started to develop similar symptoms as her friends, Barbara feared she might be next. Her thoughts went back to the day this photo was taken, and she wished they had never danced in the warm desert snow. It was the summer of 1945, and Barbara Kent was attending a small dance camp located in the desert near Ruidoso, New Mexico. Karma Dean's dance camp was, for many young girls, the perfect place to unwind and enjoy their love of dance. The owner and facilitator of the camp, Karma Dean, was a tough but motivating instructor who always had a smile on her face. The camp offered training in many dance styles including ballet, tap, and modern dance. The campers, girls aged 10 to 16, twirled, swayed, stepped, and shuffled as they practiced dance routines. And when they wanted to rest, they would swim in the cold river beside the camp. With enthusiasm, Barbara and the other girls often practiced and performed their dances late into the night, under the beautiful star-filled night sky.
Star-filled night sky? That sounds nice. Why don't we ever do anything like that? Go camping, be one with nature. I'm sure Bean will love it.
Power outlets are critical for my operational existence.
The outdoors isn't really my thing.
Oh, right. Silly me. I forgot that you just ruined the whole trip with your fear of literally everything. Look at these girls, though. Having the time of their life. What bad stuff could possibly happen to them? Nothing bad will happen to them, right, bro?
For Martha Jenkins, one of Barbara's fellow campers, she was having the time of her life. We were so engrossed in our routines, she recalled. The desert seemed like another planet, and we felt like we were dancing on the moon. Karma Dean made us believe in our dreams. Another camper, Susan Abernathy, added, "We didn't have a care in the world. Our days were filled with dance and laughter. We were far removed from the reality of the war." And indeed they were. After all, World War II, which was still raging all over the Pacific Ocean and Europe, was far from mainland USA. Pearl Harbor in Hawaii was the furthest an enemy had been able to penetrate into American territory, and that was more than 3,000 miles away. Sadly, Barbara and her fellow campers had no way of knowing that they were about to be caught in the middle of a dark, horrific part of world history.
Oh, God damn it.
On July 16th, the girls were all sleeping peacefully in their beds when a deafening sound jolted them out of their bunks. Many thought it was thunder. Others believed it was part of some military exercise, while the dance instructor assumed that one of the camp heaters might have burst. The truth, however, was something much more horrific. An extremely bright white light accompanied the sound. Julia Carter, a senior dancer, recalled that it was the brightest light she had ever seen. As they watched, they were filled with fear and fascination. Barbara and her fellow campers jostled out of their cabins. It was supposed to be dark as it was still nighttime, but as Barbara recalled, there was this big cloud overhead and lights in the sky. It even hurt our eyes when we looked up. The whole sky turned strange. It was as if the sun came out tremendous. A few hours later, the sun came up, the camp opened, and the girls prepared for their daily morning routine as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, until the snow fell.
The snow fell? In New Mexico? In the middle of July?
Very unusual, isn't it? Barbara and the others described it as dainty snowflakes falling from the sky. They thought it must be some rare desert weather anomaly. So, the girls excitedly changed into their bathing suits and jumped into the river. They laughed gleefully and rubbed the white powder on their faces. Barbara joined in on the fun, but the snow felt off. Instead of being cold like snow, it was hot. And we all thought, well, the reason it's hot is because it's summer. We were just 13 years old. The dancers were having the time of their lives dancing under the hot snowfall. The flakes continued to descend and settle over the surrounding area for a few days. And a few weeks later, summer camp was over and it was time to go back to school.
That's it? So nothing bad happened to them. Good.
Not exactly. The residents in the surrounding area saw the strange event too, not just the girls in the dance camp, and some likened it to witnessing, quote, the end of the world. In fact, the flash of light shone over 3 states. Can you imagine just how bright that light must be that it can be seen that far away?
Aliens! Calling it right now. It was aliens!
And now, hold on. Just because this was the first time that humans had ever witnessed a cataclysmic burst of energy of this caliber does not mean its source was extraterrestrial. Remember the snow that fell on the camp? Well, it fell in other places too. Gardens, orchards, farms. It even fell into ponds and rivers, which were the main sources of drinking water. And some of this snow turned into white mist that settled in ravines.
Uh-oh. This isn't gonna be good, is it? Sounds like the start of a horror movie.
In Oscuro, New Mexico, about 45 miles away, a family covered their windows with wet bed sheets to prevent the snow from getting into their house. They knew that it was not normal snow, as their chickens and beloved dog died soon after they were first exposed to the substance. At a ranch 30 miles away, the snow fell on cattle and burns appeared on their hides. Eventually, their skin healed, but the fur in the burned patches was dull gray and white.
Is there even still a question about this stuff actually being snow?
No, they did not have the naivety of childhood. They knew it was not snow, but they had no way of knowing what it was. With the fiery blast that engulfed the skies, the thunderous explosion, and the mysterious white substance that caused livestock and pets to get sick and die, residents rightly became concerned. What really happened the morning of July 16th? What was that blast? And if their animals were getting sick and dying, would they be next? The public demanded clear answers. Under pressure, government officials held a town meeting and a press conference in the mountain resort village of Ruidoso, New Mexico. Barbara, her family, and everyone in the dance camp joined the rest of the community to hear this important announcement. She remembered the huge size of the crowd. Everyone was standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear what officials had to say. U.S. Army General Leslie Groves ordered the commanding officer of Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo, New Mexico, which was around 60 miles from the explosion, to issue a statement to the Associated Press. The commanding officer walked up to the podium and cleared his throat. He looked at the crowd of concerned citizens and read from his carefully prepared script. A remotely located ammunition magazine containing a considerable amount of high explosives and pyrotechnics exploded. He also explained that while the event seemed startling, there was no loss of life or injury. Basically, government officials were saying that while alarming, it was nothing to worry about and everything was fine. But people were still confused. Some people believed it and let the issue rest. Others remained skeptical.
Well, no one had been hurt at least, right?
No, not right away. The worst part of it was what happened after that, and not just hours or days, but years later. You see, Barbara's fellow campers started getting sick. Linda Foster, who was 12 when she had attended the dance camp, suffered from thyroid cancer as she got older. Like Barbara, she was puzzled. What could have caused her cancer? Her lifestyle? Genetics? Linda wasn't the only one. As years passed, Barbara grew increasingly concerned about the news of her co-campers getting sick and dying, and began to worry that she would share the same fate as her friends. By the time Barbara was 30 years old, just 17 years after that day at camp, she had tragically become the sole survivor of the 12 girls who had danced in the falling summer snow. And now, she too began suffering from several cancers, including endometrial cancer, which affected the lining of her uterus. It wasn't just the girls from the dance camp who were getting sick either. Take, for example, Tina Cordova, who grew up in the small town of Tularosa, New Mexico, 40 miles from where the explosion took place. Although she wasn't even born yet when the event took place, her family who lived in and around Tularosa, New Mexico, suffered a myriad of cancers after the incident, like stomach, breast, and even brain cancer. At least 10 members of her family were diagnosed with the illness, and, unfortunately, some didn't survive their fight. Like Tina's father, who developed prostate and tongue cancer. The tumors spread to his neck and became inoperable. He sadly died in 2013 at the age of 71. Tina was not spared from the epidemic of cancers that afflicted her family and the citizens after the blast. In 1997, when she was 39 years old, she was diagnosed with thyroid cancer.
Jeez, how many people's lives have been destroyed by whatever this was?
The mysterious effects on people's health were felt hundreds of miles away from the site of the incident. Possibly most heartbreaking was its effects on infants. Robert Alvarez, senior police advisor to the Energy Department secretary, found that while infant death rates in New Mexico have been decreasing since 1940, they increased in 1945 by 56% within the 3 months following the event. This finding was mirrored by a healthcare provider earlier in 1945, who pointed out that 35 infants in New Mexico died in August 1945 alone. The government downplayed concerns, telling concerned citizens there was no pertinent data. Officials stated that public health and safety were not compromised.
And the dang government has the nerve to just deny that anything was happening? I bet you they're 100% responsible for all of this. They should have reached out to Morgan & Morgan and sued the government for everything they've got.
What are you talking about?
You know, America's largest personal injury law firm. These guys win big. If you're ever seriously hurt, your injury could be worth millions. A Morgan & Morgan case in Florida ended in a settlement of $12 million, which is 34 times the highest insurance offer. And in Philadelphia, another case went home with 40 times the highest insurance offer at $26 million. And that was only within the last couple of months for victims involved in life-altering car crashes.
Okay, wow, that is a lot.
Right? And they don't settle for lowball offers. Instead, if you become their client, they will fight to get you what you deserve. And you don't even have to pay these guys unless you win. If God forbid you ever seriously get injured, your case could be worth millions. And you're only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. It's so easy. You can start your claim now with Morgan & Morgan at forthepeople.com/brew, found in the description below, or by scanning the QR code on screen from your phone's camera. Thank you, Morgan & Morgan, for sponsoring today's video.
Sorry, Grill, but Morgan & Morgan wasn't founded until a few decades later. But in terms of the government being liable, you might be right. A connection can be tracked back to 3 years before the blast. In 1942, the government acquired an area of land in Socorro County, New Mexico, condemning it and suspending grazing rights. Only a couple of abandoned buildings and the project's reinforced base camp were in the immediate vicinity. The government scientists wanted to test a futuristic top-secret weapon that they had been developing in a remote, isolated, and unpopulated area with flat terrain and little to no wind. After surveying multiple candidate sites, they decided that the area in Socorro County was suitable. But here's the thing. Even though the site was deemed isolated, there were nearly 500,000 people residing within 150 miles of the test site. Carmadine's dance camp was even nearer, 50 miles from the site.
Well, clearly that wasn't far enough.
And that's not all. Some surprising things were uncovered later. Let's see. The governor of New Mexico in 1945 was not even informed of the nature of the test. In fact, he only found out about it after the war was over. Also, a day after the blast, FBI agents went to major newspapers to repress potential stories that might raise questions or issues about the test. In fact, the Defense Department fabricated 3 different stories with 6 different explanations for the public, including the story about the ammunition dump explosion. And finally, the White House had ordered and pressured General Groves, the director of the top-secret project, to develop a new war-ending weapon quickly. And as with any war tactic, the enemy should never know what you are doing. General Groves even had one of his physicists, Klaus Fuchs, arrested for allegedly sharing classified information with the Russians.
Man, it's a lot of preparation to make the test secret. Wait a minute. Is this what I think it is?
And when some of the project doctors and physicists tried to warn Groves of the potential health risks, they were met with indifference or even anger. The worry was that an order of evacuation would cause suspicion and panic among civilians. Simply put, the most important priority for General Groves was to get the weapon ready for wartime use and to keep it a secret. All other considerations, including public safety, were secondary.
Oh no.
And on July 16, 1945, a test version of the weapon, nicknamed Gadget, developed as part of the Manhattan Project, was detonated at the Trinity test 60 miles north of the White Sands National Park, and the world shook with the first ever atomic blast. Gadget released a massive explosive energy of 25 kilotons of TNT, sending out a shockwave so powerful it could be felt 100 miles away and forming a mushroom cloud that reached 7.5 miles in height. For a second or two, a blast 10,000 times hotter than the surface of the sun illuminated the night sky. When Gadget detonated, only 3 out of the 13 pounds of plutonium that was in the bomb was actually used up. When an atomic bomb explodes, it releases enormous amounts of energy, creating a fireball that vaporizes everything in its vicinity. The intense heat and pressure from the explosion heats the air, which rises and causes a vacuum in its wake. This lifts soil, water, and other debris into the atmosphere, which forms the characteristic mushroom cloud. The vaporized materials mix with radioactive isotopes created by the nuclear explosion and the leftover plutonium. These fission products are made of highly unstable atoms that emit harmful radiation, which now linger in the mushroom cloud. Then, as the cloud cools, the contaminated debris falls back to Earth as radioactive fallout, which looks similar to ash. As the ash fell, it danced in the wind and met up with a group of girls who were dancing as well. They giggled and played with the highly radioactive ash, even pressing it against their faces. They didn't know any better, because this ash was white and fluffy. It didn't look dangerous at all.
Are you frickin' kidding me? So that snow was actually radioactive fallout stuff?
Indeed, it was. After the bomb detonated, a part of the mushroom cloud drifted east, another part to the west and northwest, and a third to the northeast. In all, the radioactive cloud spread across a region 100 miles long and 30 miles wide. And as it spread, it rained radioactive particles along the way. In time, the fallout even reached New York, which was thousands of miles away.
Thousands of miles?
Yep. Remember, the dance camp was just 50 miles from the testing site, so they were definitely in the path of that cloud. 19 counties, 78 towns and cities, and a large number of ranches and farms were downwind from the cloud. Some of the hotspots reached almost 10,000 times the radioactivity levels allowed in public spaces. 2,000 miles away in Rochester, New York, Kodak X-ray films were even affected. The radiation caused black exposed spots, called frogging, to appear on the films, rendering them unusable. 5 days after the detonation, the Trinity test's chief medical officer, Stafford Warren, wrote to General Groves that there was a large quantity of radioactive dust in the air. He even added there's a very serious radiation hazard within a 2,700 square mile area downwind of the test. And radiation contamination is a serious thing. Tiny particles of plutonium can go deep into the lungs and lymph nodes. They can be carried to vital organs such as the liver, stomach, pancreas, or bones through the bloodstream, and just small amounts can lead to cancer.
Radioactive fallout produces dangerous ionizing radiation, which has enough energy to damage DNA and can lead to mutations in genes. These mutations can cause cells to grow uncontrollably, which leads to various cancers, including leukemia, thyroid cancer, and bone cancer.
It wasn't immediately evident, but over the next few decades, people who lived through the blast began to develop health problems, most notably cancer. And it didn't stop at that. In 1984, a study about exposures in southwestern Utah to radioactive fallout from atmospheric nuclear detonations at the Nevada test site was conducted. There was a noted increase in leukemia, thyroid, gastrointestinal, melanoma, bone, and breast cancers. In another study conducted by the National Cancer Institute and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, it is estimated that 80,000 people who lived or who were born in the US in the past 50 years may have contracted or will contract cancer as a result of all the nuclear tests done.
The guys doing the bombs knew that could happen, right?
Well, here's the thing. They knew there would be fallout, but they knew very little about it, and the instruments in those times used to track it were primitive. They bought cattle that were burned by radiation to study them, but they didn't collect data about civilian exposure in an attempt to avoid mass panic. Louis Hempelman, the director of the team tasked with managing the radiation from the Manhattan Project, said in a 1986 interview that the Manhattan Project's leaders were aware that civilians may have been exposed, but they couldn't prove it, and we couldn't prove it, so we just assumed that we got away with it.
This is downright evil. Criminal at the very least. Someone has to answer for this. Bro, please tell me that the people responsible for all of this needless suffering have been brought to justice.
Well, Grill, that's the mission of the Downwinders. To hold the government accountable for what happened that day.
The what?
The Downwinders. That's what they call themselves. The people and communities who were exposed to radioactive contamination from nuclear weapons testing. They lived downwind from the testing site, hence the name. These residents from New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Idaho, and Montana believe that since 1945, they have been exposed to the dangers of radioactivity and that America has poisoned its citizens. Tina Cordova, who survived cancer but lost many family members to it, is a downwinder. She later founded the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium in 2005. Their complaints and demands for accountability were finally heard in 1990 when Congress passed the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or RECA, due to pressure from sympathetic politicians, the downwinders, and the public. With this act, the government provided $50,000 as a one-time compensation to claimants who passed eligibility. Initially, the compensation was limited to former uranium miners who fell ill. Uranium mining used to be a big industry in New Mexico, and the biggest risk for the workers was breathing in radioactive radon gas and other decay products of uranium. Radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer, next to smoking. But the mines were unsafe for nearby residents also, like in Homestake, New Mexico, when a mine was leaking uranium into the nearby groundwater. Even after it closed, it continued to contaminate the groundwater and released radon gas. Radon can even be in your basement right now, even if there's no uranium mine nearby, so be sure to get it checked. The communities around uranium mines were never compensated, which added to the struggle downwinders were facing. The strict limiting qualifications to be eligible for coverage were the subject of complaints that later forced Congress to amend the RECA. Amendments were eventually approved in 2000, and compensation was given to people who may have been exposed in specific areas around the Nevada test site. Eligibility eventually increased to those affected by over 1,000 nuclear test sites all around the country and in the Marshall Islands. To date, $2.5 billion has been distributed to 39,000 claimants, while military and government workers at the Trinity test site became eligible for the RECA compensation. Many civilian downwinders remain ineligible or struggle to prove their eligibility due to strict criteria. They need to show links between their disease, their exposure to nuclear radiation, and prove that they resided in the area during the tests. Proving these things is not a walk in the park for these citizens. This is what these downwinders are fighting for: financial restitution and a formal apology from the US government.
Well, they deserve it.
But it's an uphill battle, Grill. There's debate on whether or not the fallout from nuclear testing actually caused a spike in cancer. A popular belief is that legendary actor John Wayne died from cancer because he and 220 cast and crew were filming The Conqueror in 1954, 100 miles downwind from the Trinity test site. Of the cast, 91 members contracted cancer over their lifetime, and John Wayne died of it.
That would be a cancer rate of 41.36%.
Geez, that's a lot.
But is it? Men and women have about 40% chance of getting cancer in their lifetimes in the United States, a rate that's remained similar throughout the years. Not to mention that The Conqueror had a cast of heavy smokers, including John Wayne, who smoked 5 packs a day. He got lung cancer, which he survived, but then died of stomach cancer in 1979. One of the big causes of stomach cancer is also smoking.
Okay, but what about the people who lived there with the fallout?
Well, radiation can cause several types of cancers, but general full-body exposure can cause leukemia. And a 1991 study found there wasn't a significant link between the fallout of all nuclear tests during the 1950s and leukemia cases in Utah. They determined how much radiation was in the bone marrow of those who had died of leukemia, and found only a weak association between the two variables. It's also important to note that fallout effects don't last a very long time. The most dangerous of the radioactive isotopes have a fast rate of decay, or half-life, which is why when a nuclear bomb goes off, it's only recommended to stay inside for around 2 or 3 days. But of course, longer half-life isotopes, which aren't as strong, will linger in the environment for a much longer time. If you go to the Trinity test site now and stay there for an hour, you'll receive a dose of at most 1 millirems. You receive far more than that from the surrounding environment within the span of a year, like from the sun and the food you eat. But to put that in more perspective, getting an X-ray taken can be anywhere between 20 and 900 millirems. In fact, another study that looked at cesium-137 and plutonium in soil around Utah found that population doses from external exposure throughout Utah were far too low to result in any statistically observable health effects. With studies that contradict each other, lack of proper recording equipment, and the government's desire for secrecy hindering immediate studies, it's difficult to establish what amount of health issues were actually caused by fallout from all the weapon testing during the 50s. Downwinders are a debate to this day, and Utah currently has some of the lowest cancer rates in the United States. When you or someone you know is diagnosed with cancer, it's a frightening thing. Having a place to direct your anger is easier than accepting it as pure chance. But as the saying goes, correlation does not imply causation, meaning just because you know of atomic testing in the area and someone gets cancer, it's not necessarily connected, especially if that person is a heavy smoker or the family is genetically inclined to get the disease. But were the girls from the dance camp just statistically unlucky? Or were they victims of government negligence during nuclear testing? We do know they danced in the fallout, pressing what they thought was snow to their faces, at the moment where it was the most dangerous. We also know that they all got cancer, most of them dying before they turned 30. We can never know with 100% certainty, but the correlation here is a strong and tragic one. One thing is for sure, nuclear weapons are doomsday devices. Their devastating effects are long-lasting and far-reaching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best thing you can do to help us keep making more videos, like this one about how hundreds of people have died just days after complaining of a headache. The culprit? A creature now living in our ponds, lakes, and even drinking water that is wriggling its way into people's heads and eating their brains. Click the video on screen to learn more.